framework for domestic UAS operations. Looking back on the many presentations and related discussions, what were the key points that garnered support? And I'm asking this question to the panel, and you're going to be talking about it as you go through your summaries, along with the audience. So again, plenary at ICAO.int. I expect us to have a little time, if there's time, for some additional questions or points of view that might be voiced into the auditorium. So the three questions that we're trying to answer are, what were the key points that garnered support? How can we begin to define the general framework for UAS traffic management? And how do we take the information we have received and translate it into the first steps of a global implementation plan? Now, folks, the default answer is not to say, what's ICAO going to do with this? The default is for the stakeholders to be telling us what they think the next steps are. ICAO is here to facilitate that process, but we aren't here to do it because, well, frankly, there's about four of us. So we're really interested in hearing your views on what the right things to do are. So I'd like to call the stream moderators one at a time, who will be joined by Mr. Doug Davis, who's the chair of the ICAO Unmanned Aircraft Systems Advisory Group, who was responsible for the exhaustive review process and selection process for all of the presentations here, to make some comments. And then we also have Mr. Yves Morier, who's the chairman of the Joint Authorities on Rulemaking for Unmanned Aircraft Systems. He'll also be making some remarks, not just from the perspective of the panel that he oversaw, but from his perspective as the chairperson at JARUS. So we'll start first with our three moderators. You've heard their bios, so I'm just going to let them say hello, and we'll start with it'll be Dr. Hiroko Nakamura, the Deputy Director General at Japan's Unmanned System Traffic and Radio Management Consortium. And then we'll have Captain Denis Guindon, the Director General of Aviation Oversight and Transportation and Transformation at Transport Canada. And Ms. Tracy Lamb, the Vice President, Regulatory and Safety Affairs Chief Pilot for AUVSI. So let's start out with Ms. Nakamura. Would you like to use the podium, or are you comfortable there? Okay.
So
Slides. We need slides. Do we have slide deck? We should have a slide deck. Uh-oh.
So firstly, thank you very much for ICAO for enabling me to participate at this fantastic symposium and very interesting sessions. It is hard for me to summarize the discussion. I think I need 3 hours to discuss this. But Makil helped me to make the bullets, so I'd like to summarize what
Please.
We had at our session: registration, identification, and tracking. We needed to think that technology can advance very quickly, especially in this domain. And it advances very fast when there are clear target, visions, or requirements. So target should be made with multi-perspective and long-term vision, so that the government, states, or ICAO can help to build and clear. And the UTM has various stakeholders we saw through the presentation. UTM especially is for safety, and registration is maybe for security. And we have to forget about privacy of society and also pilots, operators of the drone. And there is also financial viewpoint in UTM registration or other technologies. And presentation shows that there are a lot of technological options. And for the remote ID management and the remote identification, the best solution should be different from state to state. So locally, maybe the implementation could be different, but that might be problem if there is a operation intercontinent or inter-country. So ICAO as an enabler to harmonize protocols for global applicability. That's the things we learned from the stream one.
Okay, thank you very much, Hiroko. Thank you very much, Hiroko. So we'll move next to stream number 2, and Denis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve. And we had a fantastic panel this morning on communication. And basically, everybody's building some things that's a bit different. So what was very interesting is we're all testing different products at this point in time. So it's very, very difficult to make a timeline when we're going to get there. And so when we talk about how we're going to regulate, we still don't know what those devices really are. But I think that we need to define or adapt some of the standards that we have to be able more or less to integrate those systems and know what is system safety critical. And I think that came resounding very, very loudly this morning. We've talked about the work on acceptable safety level and associated collision risk model. And that was telling us what should be more or less the certification level of those devices. Are we looking at 10-9 like we do with airplane, or we need to look at it a little bit differently? So, and I think this is somewhat challenging for everybody, not only the regulator, but as well the manufacturer. A lot of question about availability of accurate and validated data, which was crucial to fly the device. But we need to maintain safety on the ground, but as well, if we really truly integrate into the rest of the airspace, that is crucial for us moving forward. A couple of points about the regulators. I think that we need to move forward on UTM, and regulators and stakeholders has to work together. But we need to focus on outcome. I don't think that we can redesign new prescriptive rules because it's going to be too complex. And frankly, I mean, we're moving quite rapidly right now, and every government takes years to develop regulation, and that's going to be challenging for us moving forward. At the same time, I do believe that the industry can help the regulators to really define the outcomes and the question that we need to ask. Sometimes we're lost. We're playing catch up, and sometimes we don't know what we need to ask. And very often, I see the industry asking us where we're moving, and at the same time we're saying, well, we're waiting for you to tell us where you are going. So this is very challenging. But one thing that I find it interesting this morning in our panel is I see that the regulators is speaking in one voice, and I see that the ENS provider is talking a different language, and I see the manufacturers discussing a different language. And there were one of our panelists this morning, Mr. Terence Martin from Queensland U of T, which is doing some research. And he was able to try to bring together all of those worlds by letting the manufacturing know that, you know, this piece of airspace is already regulated, and this is how it works. So I think, for me, success will be in more discussion between all of the stakeholders to make sure that we understand the same language and we adapt to one another. And that's going to be extremely crucial. The last point for me, and I've tried to summarize in 3 words, really my experience of this morning, and what I got was creativity, socially responsible, and promoting mitigation to risk. And with those 3 things, I think that is boding well for the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Denis. Excellent. And Tracy.
Okay, thank you very much. So stream 3 was geofencing-like systems, and I have to take the opportunity to thank our panelists. They were incredibly interesting, but also the interaction from our audience was also incredibly good as well. So what we took away as an overview from geofencing-like systems is that we're definitely in run mode. There's definitely no crawling or walking. We are foot to the floor and we are running. There were common themes for design for privacy, security and safety. Yet we also had discussions in the room about the accessibility and indeed the scalability of these systems. In fact, geofencing for everyone. We had also commonality on the range of global standards that should be expected from the geofencing elements, and they should be efficient and affordable, and also backed up with data and real time to make people who are the stakeholders for decision making, make that task easier for them. Good geofencing-like systems make good neighbours, and certainly this was well illustrated in our discussions and also by the panellists in their presentations. The functionality, geofencing for keeping aircraft away from safety-sensitive areas, but also keeping them in their own areas. So we had some good discussions around functionality of geofencing. Data integrity and the reliability of avionics was also an essential element. So developing trust in the systems was a very big point made also. And also going back to stream 2, the design should consider ground and air concerns, not only concerns of the UAS. And certainly one size doesn't fit all in geofencing. Certainly we should define integrity levels versus risk versus the type of operations that are being conducted and the type of UAS. And that comes back to discussions raised on safety and risk management as well. And geofencing systems should be open and globally interoperable. Our last panel, Rockwell Collins certainly culminated that all together in his presentation with bridging the gap with interoperability not only between systems but between the states, and that was an important emerging discussion. And that geofencing technology and this collaboration and communication should be agile and respond to emerging technology, which brings us back to point 1, how fast that is developing at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Captain. So, first thing I'd like to do before I go any further is I want to acknowledge all of the presenters for an incredibly interesting array of viewpoints and proposals, and for the 3 moderators on what they did to bring all of this together for us, and also yesterday for the folks that had the presentation. So a big round of applause for the moderators and the presenters. Now, from my perspective as the Director for Air Navigation Bureau at ICAO, the next 2 speakers I'm really happy to have up here with me, because they actually are the ones who have to answer this question of what's next. So Mr. Yves Morier is the chairman for the Joint Authorities on Rulemaking for Unmanned Systems, the JARUS. He's been in that role for drone activities with the EASA. He's been the full-time coordinator for drone activities with the European Aviation Safety Agency since September of 2016, and now he's the principal advisor to the Flight Standards Director. He has previously held positions in the French Civil Aviation Authority, including the deputy head of the regional office, Basse-Normandy, the Joint Aviation Authority's Regulations Director, the European Aviation Safety Agency's head of Department Product Safety and Rulemaking Directorate, and the head of the Department for General Aviation and Drones and the Certification Directorate at EASA as well. And he's going to provide some of his remarks on what he sees on the way forward, some of his impressions on some of the challenges we face. Yves?
Okay.
Yeah, just extemporaneously.
Okay, so I go. Okay. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my views. In fact, it has been an interesting 5 days, I should say, if I count the drone, the ARPAS 2017 before, and. The last 2 days have been also extremely interesting, and I would like to thank ICAO to have given me the possibility to participate in this last panel. it has been extremely interesting, and I must say I've learned a lot. I think that was hopefully the purpose. There was a great diversity of presentation, great diversity of views, and I have learned a lot. So there was a lot of food for thought, I would say. Certainly, in terms of a general remark, I would imagine that whatever we do in terms of framework for UTM will have to be performance-based. It will have also to be risk-based, and in particular, the word risk assessment has been used several times during those days, and I'd just like to point out that the JARUS has produced what we call the specific operation risk assessment, which is a methodology which is not public, which is now published on our website, and which could certainly be usable. I think also that the framework should address, well, safety first, but also security, privacy, and environment. We should not forget that even if the drones with their electric motors are less noisy, they're still making noise, and perhaps having a lot of drones flying around us, in particular in a city, could raise something. So I believe that this framework should also include environment. Performance-based means that it needs to be developed, complemented by standard, and that's extremely important. The role of industry here will be key to developing those standards in a timely manner. I think also that the framework should include some principle. I was interested by the perhaps not part, perhaps of the full of the drone enable, but the presentation made by Thales yesterday, where they raised a couple of general principles. They also raise the need for a roadmap, and I think roadmaps are important in the sense that yes, maybe we try to run, but there is probably a number of things that we need to do a bit step by step. So these are very, I would say, general remark. Another important remark is that this framework should be holistic and should take into account the interaction with the aviation system, and perhaps with a new kind of vehicle coming now, which is the electric vertical takeoff and landing. I think also one important point for me is there's been a lot of presentation, very interesting presentation of practical experiment. You know, people go on the field, they try, and they see what works and what not work. And I think this should be clearly envisaged because it's a right way to learning by doing. And we should also be able to share this information, perhaps in the form of a knowledge database or one way or another, because this will help a lot, you know. Doing research, thinking is important, but you know, using those experiments, in my view, is really fundamental. And I understand that there is, you know, a lot of things that have been recorded, trajectories have been recorded, and that perhaps could also be shared. I'm not naive. I'm sure that there are commercial implications, but probably we can try and share a number of element in there. We should also try to learn by looking at what is done in other industries, and in particular the automotive industry. There is, I think, there a lot of lessons that we can learn. The other element I wanted to raise for me, which is quite a fundamental one, is the role of the human in this system. We speak of automation, high automation. We even speak of autonomy, so the possibility of ultimately machine taking certain decisions. I think we need to reflect on the role of the human. Mr. Kimchi, in his presentation, provided a response. I must admit I don't have yet the response, but I believe that's certainly an element that we need to look when we will do the work in the small UAS working group. Spectrum is also important. I was quite impressed, I must say, and I learned a lot through the presentation of ITU yesterday, and I would certainly advise that we need to cooperate with them. Cybersecurity is also an important element, and I would like just to finish before perhaps saying a couple of words on what we plan to do in JARUS, that I think I've heard sometime, aviation is slow, aviation is this, aviation is that, drones are faster. Okay, all this is true, but I think we should perhaps stop this little bit of opposition and say, well, how can we maximize, I would say, technology transfer or knowledge both ways? And that, for me, would be an important element to do. Finally, in JARUS, in the organization which I have the honor to be the chairman, we are considering to look at JUTM. Say this is a decision that will be taken in our plenary meeting in 2 weeks, after having received the advice of our colleagues, the stakeholders, which are in the stakeholder consultative body. And certainly one element I would like to say is that JARUS, if we embark on something, will add value and certainly will not duplicate effort. There is enough work being done around to waste time in duplicating work. So ladies and gentlemen, that was my sort of a review of what happened in the last days, and I was really happy to participate and having this opportunity to state my thoughts or consideration. I am not arrogant to say that I know everything. I just have tried to share with you a number of questions I have. Thank you very much.
Yves, thank you very much. That was very comprehensive. I appreciate it. Now I'm going to ask Doug Davis, who's the chairman of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Advisory Group, for his comments. He's also the director, Office of Independent Airworthiness Research, Technology, and Engineering at Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems. In this role, Doug leads all aspects of airworthiness support across all the divisions of the company's aerospace systems sector. He's responsible for flight certification for all manned and unmanned aircraft programs. He's an established global influencer with broad industry expertise, technical breadth, and strong leadership skills, driving airworthiness policies. He also tries to balance risk with cost and make something auditable and measurable and repeatable. And he's also serving as the director of the ICAO UAS Advisory Group, as I said before. So from that perspective, your views, thoughts on what you've heard the last 2 days?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thanks to the ICAO team for putting this on. This was a new venture, this whole RFI thing, and I think it's been largely successful. Having participated with ICAO in work groups for the last 20 years, this has been a unique opportunity to get out in front and do some leading with this kind of structure. I also want to take the opportunity to thank my cohort in crime, Cliff Sweet from the Secretariat, for the amount of work that he's been doing with this. Most of you probably don't know, but a composition of the team we have as the advisory group was the team that successfully put together the toolkit that was so successful in the past year. Again, a different way of doing business for ICAO that has met the need in a rapid fashion. So our hope is that we'll bring that kind of energy and synergy to this opportunity. This was a great opportunity for me to see the state of the art of the technology, and also to talk with industry and see the desires through the briefings of where industry wants to go. It is a bit early to know whether or not we've received enough information to be able to pull together a framework. If you saw any of my colleagues who are participating on the advisory board or the advisory group, we did surveys after each presentation and submitted the surveys, and we will over this weekend be collating that data, and we're trying to take as much of an engineering approach to this as we can, which is what we use to go down to 31 briefs from the 76 or 78 that we received, so that we could be as objective as we could and not subjective. And I think that proved its case, because I was very impressed by the presentations we received today. So as we review this data over the next couple of days, we are constantly in information gathering position. Sooner or later, we'll stop the information gathering and begin to formulate some things. But based on what I've seen so far, I believe that in the next few days, a framework will begin to emerge. I can't as of yet tell you whether it's final. I also can't tell you as of yet whether or not we've received the totality of the information that we need to recommend for a product to go forward. I will tell you a couple of things that I noticed a little bit of a vacuum from industry for. I did see a couple of great opportunities where companies are partnering, UTM service providers are partnering with ATM and with some states, and those are great opportunities and examples of the relationships that ultimately will need to grow out of this effort. But I would personally, and I think my group would like to see more. That is that balance, that Maginot line of where UTM and ATM either begin to exist or don't exist anymore is a really hard problem set to solve. And we probably will need more educating and more understanding of where that problem set is. The other is, as my friend Yves Morier pointed out, is the whole cyber tsunami that's going right now, and how and who has a responsibility, first of all, for implementing the cyber, how it's going to be done, and then how that turns out to be effective and manageable. And so, again, I'm not sure that we're looking at building regulations so much as we are building, as my friend Rob Eagles says, the key principles of the opportunities that are before us with UTM and how those can help states implement a safe and effective UTM system. So happy to take any questions, Steve.
Okay. All right, thank you, Doug. So I've got a few thoughts of my own I want to share, and then I'm going to, perhaps that'll generate some comment in the panel. I've got a couple of questions. Remember, plenary at ICAO.int. So what I heard early on, and I think I've heard reiterated, is that flying, generally, it's considered a privilege. Some people might think it's a right, but if you're interacting with anybody else in society in any way, it really is a privilege. So that's step one in our thoughts about how to engage with the community. The second is that all flying is aviation. It doesn't matter whether it's a small drone, RPAS, unmanned aircraft, it's aviation. And I like what Yves said. Maybe we need to start thinking about how we do the crossovers and start learning wherever the learning can come from and adopt it within the rest of the system. Somebody was asking me earlier about, what do you do with this as an aviation regulator? And when I look at all the information that was presented here in the last 2 days, I feel for the poor ops inspector out in the field 5 years from now who has to regulate this business, because there is so much that they have to learn to be in a position of competence when they're faced with this industry. So we've got a lot of work to do to think about what that skill set needs to be so that we can get ahead of it. And the industry is literally in the leading role in helping us to define that. So again, what's the question that needs to be answered so that we can create the solutions? ICAO is traditionally focused on what I consider to be 4 pillars of activity related to standards making. The first is definitions. We're pretty good at definitions here. And I think that that's one place where we can provide support through the advisory group, working with JARUS, working with the regional authorities to provide a set of definitions that describe the scale of activity from remote airspace to very densely populated airspace, size of vehicles, categorizing risk to some degree. And that will depend upon the amount of interactivity with other kinds of aviation, with other vehicles, et cetera. The second is human procedures. How do you, as a human being, using any technology, interact with the environment around you in a way where you know your responsibilities and how you need to interact with someone else with a clear understanding of their responsibilities, what they're going to deliver to you? And I think that our focus here on procedures is going to be something that will have to be supportive of these local and regional activities that are addressing these very needs. How does a law enforcement officer interact with a drone operator? How does an airport operator interact with a drone operator? And finding some consistency that can be shared. And again, we're going to lean on the industry here. Then the next area is spectrum. I've heard this loud and clear that there's a concern about how we interact with spectrum. ICAO has traditionally focused on standardization when it affects the spectrum that's required for safety systems in aviation. So communication systems, pilot controller radios, navigation aids, starting with the old non-directional beacons, but now global navigation satellite systems, etc. Surveillance systems, making sure surveillance systems have the throughput and the speed that they need for the type of operation that they need to surveil. We can help with that work if it's an aviation spectrum, but I think we would rely on the specification industry to create those solutions once they understand what they need to answer for. So ICAO's role is to try and coalesce, I think, some of the requirements that are going to come from safety regulators in the organizations like JARUS and others, where we're talking about what we need to be able to say it's safe. Safety regulators are all about show me. Show me what you've got. Show me how it works. Show me how it works when it breaks. Show me what you do when it breaks. If the industry can answer these questions in a systemic way, they're going to be successful. If they can't, if they say, well, it works most of the time, they won't be able to. And then the last thing is training. We're going to have a clear understanding of the training that's necessary for the global community to wrap its head around this problem and the applications of this exciting technology in a way that's safe. And so ICAO can help with that, but again, we're the facilitator. We need to provide the guidance, but the industry is going to have to be our strong partner here. And I don't mean our traditional industry. I mean the industry that wants to be successful, the industry that wants to grow its business and really interact with the rest of the community. It's going to have to be ready to engage in ways that it didn't perhaps believe it needed to in the early days. But as you interact with more and more external stakeholders, it becomes clear that there's so much information that's necessary to be transferred with non-players to be successful. So I'd like some feedback from the panel. We're still looking at questions. Let me see, I'll pose one of the first questions that I got from somebody else, and then I'll turn you all loose, because we've got about 20 minutes. ICAO's, this was from the last presentation, ICAO's global registration system should it link gradually with the local UTM providers? Because there are a lot of local solutions to UTM. Their levels of maturity are going to be different. So how would you see that? Do we wait for regional standardization, or do we open it up? So curious about the method we might use as we take this forward. Anybody?
Okay, I will give it a try. Certainly, registration and with its complement identification is very important for the UTM in the European system. Is one of the, what I could say, one of the three pillars with geofencing. Now, when we come to time scales, if we have in Europe to develop a registration between now and 2019, we might have to go ahead earlier, because we will need to have those elements in place. I think we will certainly contribute to the ICAO work, but we have there I'm afraid a bit of a different time scale, and that could also exist in other areas of the world.
Okay. Denis?
From a Transport Canada perspective, we're starting to talk about registration, and we have not figured out yet. We know that we need to have something, But exactly the what, we're not sure yet, so we're a bit soul searching. So that's where we are. And there's still so many unknowns about the possibilities coming forward, and that's the issue, I guess, that we're grappling with.
So since you're doing that, I'm going to put you on the spot. As a state regulator, where are you going to go to get those standards?
Sorry, where are you
Going to go to get those standards for what you want to do for registration?
Well, actually, I've learned today that you're providing or maybe suggesting to provide some help, so which is great. So I'll bring that back home. We'll have the discussion at 9 in the morning Monday and see what the team says. But I think the question is, and what I like here is I'm hearing a lot of people is trying to harmonize. And as a regulator, for me, if there's something I've learned in the last 25 years is we have no choice than to harmonize as much as possible. So reduce the complexity, reduce the regionality of issues and approvals, so then it's easier for us when we cross borders. And when we cross borders as well, we should have a framework of regulation that's very similar to one another, unless we have a very good reason to act differently. So as a regulator, I'm all for more and more harmonization, because then I can decrease my cost, and the cost saving, I can put them where I have risk. And that's really what we're looking to do in Canada.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to just emphasize that point. How many people are still here from the industry? How many of you want to build equipment or solutions that are only used in one country? Cool. Okay. Please.
Just to answer your question, something that I learned from my panelists today was, I think that, harmonization is the ultimate goal, but every state is definitely going to be developing their own systems. And I think the key to the harmonization is the actual interface, the linking systems between all of those systems. And I think therein lies probably bigger challenges than the systems developing their own registration programs and platforms from the third-party providers. I think the key will be, what are the standards to interface and link those systems to each other for global harmonization?
And do you think those standards should be developed in an industry forum?
I definitely think we're moving too fast. Technology is moving too fast for industry not to actually drive these standards. With the assistance and facilitation of standardization bodies such as ICAO, IATA, the standards organizations of the world such as ISO, obviously AUVSI too, I have to say we're working very hard to facilitate that. But definitely it's going to be technology and industry driven, because you said yourself, what do we need? What does industry need to overcome the challenges?
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Hiroko, please.
I think some standards from at the higher level for standards for higher level, maybe ICAO can help, and technical solutions. In terms of technical solutions, standard industry can help. For example, about the registrations. In Japan now, we focus on the registration numbers exist for accepting the submission for flight in the night or beyond the visual line of sight. So Civil Aviation Bureau gives the registration. And maybe afterwards, law enforcement police want to make some identification things to enforce the safety, and they may make their own system. Then that will destroy the economy chance, like a UTM development, because the registration system and the identification systems developed separately could be not nice. So maybe a global entity can provide that the harmonized way, like when you think about the registration, why don't you think about the identification or UTM things? These points should be harmonized. These ideas can be made from upper side, And then how to implement the remote identification or other things. Technologies advance very fast, so we shouldn't wait that global entity finalizes the standard, but industry can give the options how to implement that performance required.
Okay, thank you. So I've got another couple of questions. Let's see if we can't wrap these up. Would ICAO recommend that states implement rules to safeguard controlled airspace and the international airspace classifications, thus removing rules that grant UASs the right to fly in controlled airspace without authorization from ATC? This question is followed up by saying several states have rules stating that UASs operate inside of 5 kilometers from an airport are prohibited, but they don't believe that's enough to avoid aircraft operations in controlled airspace without ATC authorization. And the last part of this question, if we've learned recently that Part 107 in the U.S. regulation, which included a rule stating UAS operations within controlled airspace require ATC, would there be a notice of proposed authorization or an MPA from EASA including a similar rule? So I just pose these questions to the group if there's anything you'd like to provide in the way of feedback or comment. So should ICAO recommend that states remove these authorizations? And if they should, and then also, is 5 kilometers enough? What are the other things you might want to see done?
I think that if you're talking about aircraft flying perhaps where they shouldn't, I think there will probably always be some element of willful non-compliance. I think the registration program goes a long way to curbing those types of incidents. However, I think in the usually they're probably not commercial drone operators infringing upon these guidelines that the local regulators and ICAO have laid out. It's usually either ignorance or hobby. So perhaps I think that as technology increases and geofencing and remote ID and tracking becomes more prevalent, I think that I think that the guidelines of ICAO will remain.
Okay.
Just to give you a little bit of metrics, what's going on in Canada with what I would call illicit drone usage in wrong places. And we do have limited around airports the usage for a very good reason at this point in time, because the user doesn't know of aviation still. And I think that we need to have somewhat of an outreach program to be able to more or less teach the people using the airspace what the airspace is all about. But to give you a bit of an idea, we probably can have 500 or 600 reports from airliners of drones being at the wrong place. And our registry is not that big. It's only 35,000 airplanes in Canada, but still, with only 40 million people, we have about 600 events a year. And that's almost twice a day. And very often, we have some fairly large birds, such as a 737, at 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters, which are encountering close 100 feet from the airplane, a large device. And that is, for me, somewhat worrisome. But the only time I believe that regular is going to be able to reopen a little bit more some of the airspace is when we're going to be able to have a technological solution to prohibit the operation at the wrong place. And I think this is what we need to concentrate, manufacturers and regulators. Because too often the user is able to have a device that's not too expensive, that he can buy and he can use wherever he wants. So I think technology is probably part of the solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Denis.
Okay, it's a difficult and important question. I think what we should consider probably is establishing, for example, system of zones to protect airport and other sensitive areas if we think of security. Now we should also try to see how those zones could be defined in a manner not to be overburdensome, because just think of the lateral protection of an aerodrome. You can probably fly a bit higher when you are lateral to the runway than when you are just in the approach or takeoff path. So this system is probably an important one. The other defense that we have is the geofencing at the time being. So that's, I think, also part of the problem. So, but yes, the air risk is something that we need to consider, and when listening to your metrics, I could probably also put forward a number of metrics in other countries that show that, okay, events are happening.
Thank you, Yves. Doug?
I would just add that I'm here as a representative for CANSO, and I will tell you from an air navigation service provider perspective, I believe that ANSPs like the setup where classes of airspace are described and defined by the equipage required to enter and to operate and receive air traffic services in that airspace. And as Yves just mentioned, that's by design. I mean, class in the U.S., Class B is the busiest terminal, most complex, most with the big iron that's moving in and out every day. So consequently, you know, it's very important that if you have an intention of entering that airspace, that proper orders maintain efficient and effective and safe. But that's not to mean that there can't be a new look at that airspace. And I think that as a community, we should be driving new looks at those airspace for new entrants like this, done in an effective, disciplined process. But the other thing to keep in mind too, and we discussed this in the RPAS symposium, is that this technology is still moving. It's still moving very fast. It's difficult to be able to project to ANSPs, is it going to always be this model of quad rotor that I'm going to see, or am I going to see a new version of this quad rotor doing something completely different in about 3 months or so? And those kinds of changes, the fluid changes, are difficult in an aviation environment like ours to stay in front of.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That has such an impact on the training and the dissemination of solid information so people can act effectively. Somebody asked me the question here in one of the feedbacks is, do we anticipate change in the deadlines for the Global Aviation Safety Plan, the Global Air Navigation Plan, the state safety programs because of drone regulations? No. These are all rolling, well, the GASP and the GAMP are both rolling plans. They update routinely. And as we gain more experience and information about how drones impact aviation, we will be including that in the plans. For the state safety program, I would say that the rollout of safety management is becoming even more critical because of the introduction of this technology, because the risk assessment methodologies that have to be taken in the field require an understanding of how to manage risk. And SMS is all about how to manage risk. The SSPs are all about how to manage risk. So I think that we're going to be wanting to leverage that capability into this industry so that the industry has the ability to independently create in a way where it has a high probability of success when it approaches a regulator for an approval. And that I think would be the objective systemically at ICAO. I would feel the greatest success if I don't hear that the regulatory community is the critical path issue on most of these introductions. So that's kind of I think that's a really important point from the perspective of the folks in the industry, but it also levies a responsibility on us collectively as regulators, with ICAO representing the member states. And of course, JARUS is on the front end of that with key members who are trying to iterate and operationalize their guidance. So I think we're coming to a close, and I'm just going to repeat the questions because I think we've nailed them. What were the key points that garnered support? everybody sees UTM as a concept that has broad value for solving the problems that were identified. Yes, there are a lot of elements that still need to be proven, still need to be developed, but there's clearly a need for UTM concepts, definitions, procedures, and technology to be refined and defined in a way where they can be shared widely. The industry is the international focal for that. Most of the big proponents operate internationally with more than one regulator at their coalface. So I think it's important that the industry think through how it can approach the various states through the venues that are already existing, and now adding ICAO as perhaps a top-level facilitator for consensus as the various regional applications continue to grow. How do we take the information we've received here and translate it into the first steps of a global implementation plan? A small UAS advisory group.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
And what would be the next steps for all of you to be able to interact with this? So you've all got other venue whereby you're doing this, but at ICAO we've been thinking about the fact that there needs to be this consolidation methodology. So our next checkpoint on the road to the future is the Global Air Navigation Industry Symposium in December. And we will be discussing a broad range of aviation issues that will interact with drones and RPAS. There's going to be discussions about how to manage the airspace at very high altitudes above flight level 650 in the future, and how that interacts with space law, and how the operational needs of commercial space interact with the commercial needs of high-flying balloons and drones versus high-performance business aircraft. And there will be civil-military conversations, and how do you interact with authorities who want to manage the airspace in a repeatable and safe way. We've made a commitment now for the third Global Remotely Piloted Aircraft System Symposium in Chengdu, China next year, and that will be linked in the same week, as we have done this time, with a drone-enabled activity. And that drone-enabled activity kicks off with the next request for information at the end of January. That will have given us time to assimilate what we've heard here, for the advisory group to have produced some recommendations which we'll be sharing with the leadership at ICAO, and that will be on display at the GANIS, and then for another round of consultation in January prior to releasing the RFI, and then of course the event itself in September. So at this point, I think it's time for, again, one more round of thanks. So I'd like to ask all the members of the advisory group who are here to stand, please. They're all out at the park. All right. Because honestly, folks, if they hadn't answered the call about a year and a half ago to start talking about how we could do this and accelerate this methodology, we wouldn't be here today. And then I can't forget to talk with their partners here in the organization. So everyone in the RPAS group and in the production group that worked with them, please everybody stand. And I'd like to ask for a round of applause for all the work on the production. I want to make a special note. I didn't do it. I won't make you stand back up, Sam. Leslie Carey, of course, is our program manager for remote piloted aircraft systems and has been working the UAS issues. Sam Brand is sitting next to her. Sam is our business. I'm not going to get your title right, Sam, but she's responsible for all of the business products that ICAO has been working to deliver. And it is her work and her team's work has really changed the way that ICAO communicates, and is starting to take, the very dry, stale state letters that we mail out to the states and turn them into something that might keep you interested for long enough to get to the bottom line. And so I want to really appreciate the work that that group's been doing to take all of these concepts and ideas and turn them into something that's really pretty exciting. And in that regard, so one of the last notes or questions I had was, where are these presentations going to be? Now, the presentations will be posted up on the website, but they're even better with sound. So you can find all of the presentations on the ICAO YouTube channel. The entire symposium has been captured on the ICAO YouTube channel and is posted and recorded so that you can replay any of the presentations that you might have missed if you were in one of the other sessions, and you'll be able to actually see the presentation with the commentary that came with it, which I think adds a lot to it. And that's a credit to all of the presenters. So I'd like to finally ask the presenters to stand up, the ones that are still here, so that we can give you a round of applause, because you were the reason we're here. Thank you. Second. Okay. And Leslie, would you like to?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make one correction on that. We only had the live stream going on in plenary or on that side during the split, so I'm sorry.
All right,
We
Leslie's
don't have
correcting
all
me.
of
I apologize. So if we were down in the geofencing, we didn't capture the video. We haven't got the technology deployed in all of our rooms yet, so we weren't able to do that. But we do have the presentations on the website. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for sharing your Saturday with us. We hope you'll have an opportunity to enjoy a little Montreal afternoon and evening, and safe travels home. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next venue. Thank you very much.